You're listening to Puma Podcast.
Hi, I'm Kat Ventura, Puma Podcast, and you're listening to Teka Teka News, where we slow things down so you can catch up with the week's biggest stories. Today is June 12, Araw ng Kalayaan, and we want to commemorate it with you. And so we'll be playing an episode from another Puma Podcast show called What's Up? Araling Panlipunan Rebooted. In this episode entitled UNdependence Day, because it's not as simple as waving a flag, hosts Sab Schnabel and Siege Tantenko brush up on Philippine history from 1898 to the 1940s as they take a closer look at our Independence Day.
We're all familiar with the image of June 12, 1898. The White House in Kawit, Aguinaldo standing in the balcony and waving a flag that looked a lot like the one we know today. It had the white triangle, and in it, the sun with 8 rays, 3 stars to symbolize Luzon, Visayas, and Mindanao, and the red and blue fields. In this version, though, there was a face on the sun.
So we did have a flag. Take that, colonial justification. This particular flag was sewn by Marcela Marino Agoncillo and Lorenza and Delfina Herbosa Natividad. As the Constitution was signed by our brave forefathers and this one random white guy, more on him later, our flag was raised proudly to the tune of La Marcha Nacional Filipina.
Picture the rebels kicking it with the Ewoks and celebrating the takedown of the evil empire in Return of the Jedi.
But as we were declaring ourselves a sovereign nation, the U.S. had bought us. The 1898 Treaty of Paris put Guam, the Philippines, Cuba, and Puerto Rico under the protection of the United States.
America paid the Spanish $20 million, or in 2018 money, that's over $609 million. For comparison, some other places that the U.S. bought are most of the Midwest. It was sold to the U.S. government, doubling the size of the country in the Louisiana Purchase. That was $15 million at the time, or $253 million in 2018. There's also Alaska, which was $7.2 million, or roughly $103 million in 2018. But that's a lot of numbers. Basically, the US bought us for roughly 50% of what Avengers Endgame made at the box office in their opening week.
And so while we thought we were taking the reins of our republic, the rest of the world saw only the transaction from the Spanish to the Americans, even though we did have a flag. And not just a flag, but a constitution and a government.
See, while we thought we had already declared our independence in 1898, it wasn't enough. In the second episode of Puma Podcast's TED Talks, ex-SC spokesman Ted talks, see what we did there, about 4 aspects of sovereignty.
The word sovereignty refers to 4 aspects. First, a state that is sovereign has rights or power over a particular territory. Second is accountability and responsibility over a population. Third is there are specific authority constituted. And fourth is that other sovereign states recognize the state as sovereign.
And boom goes the dynamite. We had the first 3, but not the 4th. Arguably the most important. While we were declaring our independence, it was self-determined. The rest of the world considered this territory under the sovereignty of the Spanish. So when they signed the treaty with the Americans, that sovereignty passed from one to the other. So while we knew we were independent, the rest of the world did not recognize this happening. This is why on things like Game of Thrones, they keep saying rightful king, because they have sovereignty.
So, after the longer than you think it is Philippine-American War, our 2 countries entered a tentative peace. We were not ostensibly a colony, but a protectorate. What's up with that?
The U.S. and its colonialism is really its own episode.
Fear not, we Filipinos were not finished. We just tried a different tactic. If arms were not going to work, diplomacy would. President Manuel L. Quezon successfully lobbied the U.S. president at the time, Franklin D. Roosevelt, cajoling him and the rest of the United States into committing to withdrawing from the Philippines and leaving us alone.
Also, they were dealing with the Depression at the time, so it seemed like a good idea to downsize, and the Tidings-McDuffie Act was signed in 1935. This gave the Philippines a 10-year transition period, with our full independence to be declared on July 4th, 1945. So, 1935 to 1945. How has our world changed since 1898? Well, The War of the Worlds was turned into a radio play and freaked out the English-speaking populace who thought aliens were invading for real. Radium, the element that won Madame Curie's Nobel Prize, turned out to be terribly toxic. It killed her and dozens of other people. As the glowing green color was so popular, it had been used to make paints and wallpaper. It's still the color we think of as nuclear green.
So, 1935, the Tidings-McDuffie Act was signed and put into law, setting the clock. 10 years to Filipino independence. And then the Japanese invaded.
And so our independence was again thwarted, this time because of World War II.
World War II had huge repercussions for the Philippines, but the events of the war are too much to get into. For our subject today, what we need to know is that while most of the fighting ended in 1945, our independence was not given to us until 1946. On July 4, 1946, the Philippines was declared independent, with General Douglas "I shall return" MacArthur himself saying,
"With this ceremony, a new nation is born. 48 years ago, the mantle of American sovereignty fell over this land and this people. It was the beneficent sovereignty of a liberator, pledged to be withdrawn as soon as the well-being of the people would safely permit. America never wavered in that purpose. America today redeems that pledge."
Once again, our flag was raised over the flag of our colonizers, this time on the grandstand in front of the Rizal Monument. A gift from our benevolent protectors. We shared July 4th as our Independence Day for almost 20 years, until 1963.
In 1963, President Diosdado Macapagal signed Proclamation Number 110 to declare, quote, "The establishment of the Philippine Republic by the revolutionary government under General Emilio Aguinaldo on June 12, 1898, marked our people's declaration and exercise of their fight to self-determination, liberty, and independence." End quote.
Listen to the full Independence Day episode by WhatsApp Araling Panlipunan Rebooted on their channel. Simply search What's AP on your favorite podcast app or simply click the link that we've included in the description of this podcast. Again, I'm Kat Ventura, the executive producer of Teka Teka News. This episode was edited by Carl Sayat. Teka Teka News is available in all podcast apps. You can also listen to us on YouTube. Maraming salamat po at nais namin kayong batiin na maligayang araw ng kalayaan.